everyone, Chris Whitten here. Glad to be back with you here today. So today's video, I wanted to talk a little bit about starting a music revolution. You know, I was very fortunate when I was about 20 years old. I left Oklahoma, moved to Austin, Texas, right as the Texas music scene and the Red Dirt music scene were kicking off, kind of independent of one another, but then, you know, over a few years it kind of combined forces and became a force to be reckoned with. And in a lot of ways it turned the established status quo on its ear. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about what happened through that whole period and how we ended up where we're at today with the Texas Red Dirt scene and all the things that go along with that. So without further ado, let's dig into it. So for those of y'all who weren't around at that time, you know, in 1996, the FCC changed the regulations on radio stations with what was called the Telecommunications Act of 1996. And essentially what that did, and this is not real well understood or well known amongst people probably outside of the music business, but essentially they deregulated the radio stations and made it, I guess in short, made it legal to own a monopoly in the radio station world. At that point, you had companies, just a couple of major players that came in and they started buying up all the radio stations across the country, and the biggest one being Clear Channel Communications. And at the height of their, for lack of a better word, monopoly, is they had around 1,100 radio stations. But not only did they own radio stations, they also owned venues, a lot of the amphitheaters and stuff like that. They owned the concessions companies for those venues. They just had a total lockdown on the market. And their excuse was that they didn't own all the radio stations in a given market, but they would own the top 2 or 3 radio stations in a given radio market. And obviously, you know, that led to some concern. And then, of course, over a period of time, people started to question, you know, how do you get on the radio? I mean, because it was very obscure even within the music industry, what kind of parameters were being followed as far as what they were choosing to put on the radio. Your local program director at that point had very little control over what he was allowed to play. But anyhow, so that's just, I want to kind of set the stage right now. That's one aspect of it, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along and how that affected what we were doing in the early 2000s in Texas, particularly in Austin. Another major thing that happened around the time I moved to Austin was the release of Napster. So Napster was released in 1999 as a peer-to-peer music sharing platform, and obviously, you know, you could buy a CD, load those songs onto your computer. You can upload them to the Napster software and essentially share them to anybody else, and allow other people to download them from your computer. And of course, this was a revolutionary thing at the time. You know, streaming services didn't exist. This was all new territory. The internet was really blowing up at that point. And so this had a major impact on the major label system that had existed for decades leading up to that point. It really left the powers that be kind of scrambling to figure out how to make money moving forward in the future and how to maintain some kind of checks and balances as far as you know, what music was released, when it's released, who's getting paid for it, make sure the songwriters are getting paid, and all those sorts of things. And that's, you know, that's a big deal. You put a lot of time, money, and effort into this, especially as a record label. You know, they're paying to record it, to promote it, to shoot a video for it, and all the things that go into that, the distribution at that time, you know, printing the CDs, getting those on the shelves. It was a huge undertaking to do all that, and it costs a lot of money. Of course, I say the record label, in actuality, a lot of people don't realize all that money comes out of the artist's pocket before they see a dime. They have to, the record label recouped all those costs. But that's it's a whole other story. But it does play into what we're going to talk about with this whole revolution and what everybody was trying to accomplish there in Austin at that time. Now, as for me, I had a little bit of experience with Nashville. I had the opportunity to record on a major label release from a really big artist. And it was like the stars aligned. I happened to be in Nashville at the time they were working on the album. I met one of the guys involved with it. There was a scheduling conflict, and they needed Fiddle done ASAP because they were getting ready to send the stuff off to mastering, and I didn't even know who I was recording for at the time, to be honest with you. It wasn't until after the fact and after I was paid that I was told who the album was for. And ultimately, I didn't get credit for that. So I was a little, burnt out on, just seeing how things operated in Nashville. And to give you an idea of how things kind of progressed from there, around that time, I remember doing a session at one of the major studios in Nashville, and I'd set it up for some friends back here in Oklahoma. I was going to play on the session, but the rest of the musicians on the session were going to be Nashville A-Team players like Brent Mason and Eddie Bears on drums and Glenn Worf on bass, and some of these guys. And at that point in time, for the studio and the musicians, you were looking at just over $100,000. You actually had to put about, I think it was $36,000 into an escrow account just to reserve the musicians for that session. So fast forward about a year and a half after I moved to Austin, from that time, the guy who ran that studio actually contacted me, and he said, things are kind of going south around here. We're dying for business. I know you're in Austin now. We're hearing a lot of rumblings up this way about things that are going on in Austin with these Texas artists, and I just wanted to let you know that that deal that cost over $100,000 a year and a half ago, now, I'll let all your friends down there know if they want to come do a record with us. We'll do the same deal for them for $12,000, and I'll pay you a kickback for anybody you send my way. So that gives you an idea how things started to kind of change in that world with Napster. And then, of course, with Napster, after about a year, it became a big deal because there was a demo from Metallica that somehow was uploaded onto Napster and released and shared. And as a result, it ended up on the radio. And of course, once it ended up on the radio, it came to Metallica's attention. There were lawsuits filed. The same thing happened with Madonna. She had a single coming out, and somebody uploaded it to Napster before the release. So it was released for free on the internet before the record label actually released it to radio. That is a major thing. If something is leaked to radio or whatever ahead of time, because the idea being to get on the charts and to chart high, you want as much oomph as you can right out of the gates to try to get your single as high, and especially if possible get it to debut as high as possible on the charts. If a song is leaked like that and it kind of trickles out, by the time the label has officially released it to radio, you're going to lose a lot of that thunder and a lot of that chart activity. So, and as a result, that's going to affect the bottom line for the record label and the artist. Just as a side note, over the years working on sessions and working with artists who were nationally recognized and had a new album coming out, we were getting ready for the live show. If we got mixes, advanced copies of the songs so that we could learn them for the live show. And also, sometimes you have to do this even if you played on the album, because, you record an album and then 6 months down the road you did 20 different versions or however many takes of it, and you don't know what, and they, kind of comp things together and everything. So you never really know what the finished product's going to sound like until you hear it. But anyway, a lot of times you would get a work CD or a track sent to you to work off of, just to learn your parts for the road. Well, I've had those before where the major record labels were releasing them. They would actually put a tone that beeped every few seconds in there. So if it ends up out in the public before the album's actually released or the single's actually released, they might have some idea of who actually leaked it, Anyway, so all of this stuff was going on, and it just caused total chaos when it came to the major labels and the way music was distributed and just how the whole system worked for decades, like I said before that. And it was a total revolution in the entire music industry at that point. Things changed so quickly and so dramatically that I remember, I believe it was in 2001, Sony Nashville laid off something like 1,100 employees all at once. And I remember that was the craziest thing, because you had all of these people from scrambling to find work there in Nashville. So a lot of them had ended up doing the same job they'd been doing. They were just at a different label, or they might have a different title, but they're basically doing the same thing. It's like you just shuffled the deck, and you didn't really know who was where, and it was confusing. You couldn't get a hold of people, and kind of chaotic in that time period. And of course, Sony kind of led the way with that layoff, and in the aftermath of that, a lot of other labels also laid off quite a few individuals, and it just, like I said, it's like everybody just threw everybody up in the air and everybody settled down in different spots, you know. It was really an interesting time to enter into the music business, and I think that it afforded a great opportunity for the Texas and Red Dirt artists to start getting a toehold into this system. So going into it, at that point in time, when I moved to Austin and went to work for Kevin Fowler, there was just a handful of guys who were really out there working the market, and there were more coming along, but that were just really kind of hammering away and doing fairly well. You had Pat Green, you had Corey Morrow, Dub Miller, you had Cooter Graw, and then from on the Oklahoma side, you had Cross Canadian Ragweed, Jason Boland and the Stragglers. A little bit later, you had Stoney LaRue come into the picture. As I said before, because of the way the rulings changed with the FCC and because of the stranglehold that Clear Channel Communications had on the industry at that point in time, you know, like I said, you couldn't just call up a program director, talk to him, get him to listen to your song, and if he liked it, he would play it. Because the reality of it was, it had to be approved by corporate, by Clear Channel. If it wasn't on the corporate approved list, then it wasn't going to be allowed on the radio. And if that program director just went ahead and played it anyway and it got back to corporate, they would lose their job for it. So there was always this song and dance in that period there in the early to mid 2000s. Anytime you released a record, you went out to do the radio tours, you would go into all these radio stations, especially the big weighted stations in the larger markets. They couldn't play your song. You knew they couldn't play your song. They knew that you knew. It was just like, but you had to go, it was like an act that you kind of had to go through, and but you still had to, you know, forge these relationships with these guys. And you know, it wasn't these program directors' fault. Most of them would be more than happy to play it, but they just weren't allowed to. You know, the best they could do is maybe have you in for an on-air because you're playing in town that night, play your single, and visit with you for a few minutes, and that would be the end of it. And the song would never be added to rotation on the radio station as a result of it. But it was kind of frustrating. So metaphorically speaking, we were hacking our way through the rainforests of the music industry at that point. We had no radio support. And the other big thing at that point in time, of course, you know, the majority of your music sales were going to be through CDs, and you had to have distribution, physical distribution for that product. And there were a couple of companies that we used quite a bit and we were thankful for, one being Southwest Wholesale out of Houston, and the other being Anderson Merchandising, which they were headquartered out in Amarillo, and they handled like Hastings and Walmart. As a result of all of that, in order to really make a living and stay afloat, we made our living off of our live shows. And because we didn't have really good radio support, you know, when you tried to break into a new demographic or a new market, whenever you'd come into the place, you know, you're not going to draw a great crowd the first time. People haven't heard of you. You're not on the radio. So, you know, you have to have a really great live show, and you got to depend on word of mouth. For a lot of the guys, especially like Pat Green and Corey Morrow, those guys did really well in the college market, in those college towns around Texas. And you think about this, you somebody who's a freshman or a sophomore in college, you know, they go out to see, you know, Pat or Corey or us with Kevin or whoever, and then you know, they buy a T-shirt and a CD, and they go home for Christmas, and they've got all these Texas music CDs and merchandise, and you know, their kid brother or sister who's in high school, you know, they want to be cool like their older siblings, so you know, they get turned on to this music. So it just kind of grew from that. That college demographic around that time was super beneficial. Our situation with Kevin was a little bit different. He had been in a hair metal band called Dangerous Toys in the late 80s and early 90s. He was more of a blue-collar guy. He was a little older than Pat and Corey and everybody. So he looked at it a little bit differently, and he saw a little different kind of a niche market there. And it was a huge demographic that was not being catered to or serviced in any sort of way. And that was just your everyday blue-collar working folks, you know. He kind of tailored his whole image and music a little bit to that, which, I mean, it wasn't like he was trying to be something that he wasn't. I mean, he was a country boy from Amarillo. You know, that demographic, you know, they might be listening to AC/DC or Motley Crue and then turn around and throw on an old Haggard tune or whatever, you know. And that all was kind of encompassed in Kevin's background. So, you know, he he went back to that and relied heavily on what he knew, what he grew up on. And so our demographic was a little bit different in that regard, and we did really well in the dance hall circuit around that. For many years we played all the old Texas dance halls, and there were so many of them around. So that's kind of what I walked into. It kind of gives you a little bit of a background and an introduction to where things were at, circa 1999, 2000, and going into the early 2000s. So I want to go ahead and break this video up into multiple parts because, it is a lot to unpack. Just wanted to give a little bit of background and just let you know, kind of set the scene, if you will, for what I walked into at that point. As always, please like, subscribe, and share. I am so thankful to everyone out there who has been watching these videos and sharing them and commenting on them. I've had a lot of great feedback, and I really love that. As always, if you would like some violin or fiddle tracks recorded, please get in touch with me. I would love to help you out with that. I also offer lessons. I can do classical as well as fiddle stuff. I'm classically trained. So let me know. We can do those remotely and work around your schedule, make it nice and simple. So until next time, have a great day, a wonderful week, and keep on picking.